This is a disclaimer. This episode may contain graphic descriptions of crime and criminal activity. It therefore may not be suitable for listeners under the age of 18 or for those who may find the descriptions as disturbing. Listeners' discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to another episode of Krime KE podcast. My good name is Ajuma, and I am very grateful that you took time to listen in today. Now, this is episode 8 of season 3, and in this season, I decided to document the stories of femicide in Kenya. Femicide still remains a big crisis in Kenya today, and I believe that every woman, including those whose stories were featured on this season of the podcast, deserve to live a full life free from fear, violence, and injustice. Now, in this episode, we will discuss the murder of Rebecca Cheptegei. Cheptegei was a Ugandan athlete who was actually a record holder in the women's marathon. She lived and trained in Kenya, and she even ended up dying in Kenya at the age of 33. She was a respected Olympian, and from the look of things, she had a bright future in athletics. But her life was snatched from her in September last year. And now, without further ado, let us get into today's episode, and please stick around until the end of this episode to find out how you can support this podcast. Rebecca Cheptegei was born on 22nd February of 1991 in a village on the border of Kenya and Uganda. She grew up in a village called Cheptegei in Uganda, where she first got married to a man identified as Simon Ayeko. Together, they had 2 daughters before they separated, and Cheptegei left him in Uganda and moved to Kenya to train. Cheptegei had joined the Uganda People's Defense Force in 2008, and she rose in the ranks to become a sergeant and even a member of their athletics club. When she moved to Kenya, she bought land and built a home close to athletics training centers in Iten, where she went to train for her races with other athletes. At the time she moved to Kenya, she got into a relationship with one Dixon Diema Marangach. Now, despite everyone else saying that Cheptegei and Diema were in a relationship, her father has always maintained that the two were just friends. He said that the only relationship he recognized was the one Cheptegei had with the father of her 2 daughters. In an interview with the BBC, Cheptegei's brother said that the two lived together for a while before they started having frequent disagreements about money in 2023. He said that most of their disagreements involved Ndiema questioning Cheptegei about what she was doing with her money. According to her former coach, this relationship was taking a toll on Cheptegei even psychologically. The coach said that Cheptegei often confided in her about her relationship, and she even said that the turmoil in her relationship sometimes negatively impacted her performance on the track. The coach said that after 2 years, the two separated, but the separation came at a very high cost for Cheptegei. According to her father, Ndiema tormented her daughter for a very long time. He described him as an animal who stalked Cheptegei for months, beat her up, and even threatened to cut her into pieces. Cheptegei's father said that she reported domestic violence and the threats multiple times to the DCI office in Trans Nzoia County, but they did nothing to help her. It seemed like Cheptegei's abuse was an open secret because even in February of 2023, she got a new running coach who also said that he was aware of the threats that she was getting from Ndiema. The coach told the media that Ndiema was an alcoholic and he was also controlling towards Cheptegei. He said that he had tried to ease the tension between them on several occasions and encouraged Cheptegei to remain in Iten so that he could train and focus on her career in peace. But on August 11th of 2024, Cheptegei ran in what was probably the biggest race of her career yet. She finished in the 44th position in the 2024 Summer Olympics in the women's marathon in Paris, in France. She was hopeful that she would do better in her next race, but she had no idea that this would actually be her last race. 3 weeks after that, 3 weeks after the race in France on September 2nd, Cheptegei was scheduled to go back to Iten and train for the Military World Games. However, she would not make it to Iten because on September 1st, she received an unexpected visit from Diama. At the time, they were separated. September 1st of 2024 was a normal Sunday for Cheptegei until it wasn't. She had just returned from church with her 2 daughters when Diama showed up unannounced at her place. According to the police report, neighbors had them arguing about a piece of land that Cheptegei had purchased. A few minutes later, they heard screams coming from Cheptegei's home. When they went to see what was happening, they saw Cheptegei burning and running towards them asking for help. The neighbors say that when they tried to help, they were met with resistance from Diama, who was armed with a machete. Now, according to the police reports, Diama showed up at Cheptegei's home. They argued about land, and by the way, they were even headed to court over the land dispute. So they argued, and after a while, he left. Cheptegei thought he was gone, but he had just gone to buy petrol. He returned carrying a 5-liter jerrycan full of petrol, and he poured it on her before setting her on fire. The neighbors were eventually able to help them because in the process of pouring petrol on Cheptegei, Diama also poured some of the petrol on himself. So when he lit the fire, he also caught fire. The two were rushed to Kitale County Referral Hospital before being transferred to the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital in Eldoret. By the way, throughout the incident, Cheptegei's 2 daughters, who are 9 years old and 11 years old, and her teenage sister were present and witnessing everything as it happened. I cannot even begin to imagine how traumatic that experience was and still might be for them today. Now, police were called to the scene and they recovered the empty petrol, jerrycan, and Cheptegei's phone, which had been damaged in the fire. Cheptegei was admitted at the ICU in MTRH for more than 75% burns on her body. The doctors told the Standard newspaper that she had suffered skin damage and the inhalation burns had affected her throat and her airways. With Cheptegei fighting for her life in the hospital, her parents took custody of her 2 daughters. Diama was also admitted at MTRH with 30% burns, and the doctors say that he was more affected by inhalation burns. 4 days after the incident on September 5th, Cheptegei succumbed to her burn wounds and died. The doctors say that she died from organ failure after her kidneys failed and her condition worsened. Her death sparked anger across Kenya for a very long time over the high levels of gender-based violence and femicide, especially towards female athletes. She was the 3rd female athlete to be killed in Kenya over a period of 3 years since Agnes Tirop's murder. Agnes Tirop's case was featured on this podcast, I think 2 or 3 episodes ago. If you have not listened, go back and listen because it's still an ongoing case and justice has not been served. In all these 3 cases that were happening throughout the 3 years, their romantic partners were the main suspects. Now, even Diama was expected to face charges in a criminal case for Cheptegei's murder, but he also succumbed to his injuries on September 9th before that could happen. The doctors at MTRH say that he died after he developed respiratory failure as a result of severe airway burns and sepsis. On the 13th of September, athletes held a procession while escorting Cheptegei's casket from MTRH to her home in Endabez in Kitale before she was taken to Uganda for burial the next day. The athletes and activists in the procession used this opportunity to speak against GBV and to also ask for justice for Rebecca Cheptegei. Now, Cheptegei was buried on the 14th of September of 2024 in her ancestral home in Bukwo in Uganda. Her funeral was attended by thousands of people. She was a very well-respected athlete. Because she was a member of the Uganda's armed forces, her coffin was carried by fellow members of the military, and she was accorded a 3-volley gun salute. Cheptegei was eulogized as a great athlete who lived a simple and focused life and was always willing to offer guidance to fellow athletes. Now, I am going to end this episode with a quote written by one Sarah Gearhart for an article for Run, which is an online athletics news website. She writes, quote, "Rebecca Cheptegei was a mother, a sister, a daughter, a friend, and a top-tier athlete. And now she is part of a statistic, an example of another woman who has been horrifically failed by a system that could have done more to protect her." We have come to the end of this episode. That is all I have for you on the story of the murder of Rebecca Cheptegei. Now, there were interviews where some of her fellow athletes and those who are close to her say that Ndiema's death served as justice for Cheptegei's death. And I'm curious to know what you think about that. I'm going to leave a poll on this episode. You can answer the poll and elaborate in the comments. Like, what do you think? Do you think that his death serves as justice for her murder or not? I don't know. I don't know what justice looks like for a case where someone has been killed. I really don't know what justice looks like because it's very hard. I don't know if you want to have your day in court or death, which I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that his death serves as justice or it doesn't? Or what does even justice look like for you or for the family in this situation? Otherwise, you can support Crime KE podcast by sharing this episode with your friends so that we can get a larger community to listen to these cases. I have also tagged the podcast contact information and social media pages in the show notes of this episode so that it is easier for you to reach out if you have any feedback on this episode or the podcast in general. You can also use the same information to suggest crime cases that you would want to hear on the podcast, and I will get to them. By the way, next week we will not be doing a femicide case. I really feel overwhelmed by the, what do I say? I feel overwhelmed by these cases of femicide. So next week there will be an episode, but it just won't be a femicide episode. We'll take a break for that week, then we'll continue the other week. With all that said and done, do not forget to give this podcast a 5-star rating on Spotify and catch the next episode of Crime KE podcast on Thursday next week. But until then, stay safe and remember, it is crime with a K.